Hello and welcome to yesterday's Airlines. We are 5 months into the year now, and this is the fourth set of Gemini Jets release announcements for 2024. So, what have they got coming up for us in May? Well, they've got 11 different models, 10 if you don't include the flaps down as a separate variant, and a much wider geographic spread than last month, but at the same time, still pretty familiar Gemini territory across the board. So not a lot of surprises, but a couple of surprises here and there, and some nice selections. Now, taking a look at last month's models, and of which the official Gemini release pictures have come out now, and they all look like they turned out pretty well. It's always a little hard to tell from Gemini shots, but they generally look like they turned into a nice selection of models. Can't see any grievous errors on any of them, and they were using some of the better molds. Can't say I love their 77800s, as I've talked about before, but even the Mexicana one didn't look like it was dreadful. Actually, I have to say their MD-80 didn't look particularly hot. I'm really not sure about the front end of that, but still, the rest of the model's looking pretty good. Some question marks about why there are no aerials on the Embraer E-Jets. Just Gemini saving money by omitting the aerials there, I think, because JC typically do add the aerials. I know it costs more to add aerials, and I know that's why Gemini leave some aerials off their models. But overall, a nice looking bunch, nothing to really get upset about, and some of the models like the United Max 9 and the little E175 Go Dogs look really good. So well done, Gemini. Nice set. This month, I think there's a lot of potential for it also to be a nice set. So we're getting to have a look at those in a second. Before we do, as always, chuck a like on the video and subscribe to the channel if you're enjoying the content. Thank you very much. Follow me on Instagram at YesToAirlines, and of course, yesterdaysairlines.com, the website where I post a lot of what I think is cool content. Been doing some interesting things recently, I think. I just posted a detailed model scoring for the 747-8. Check that out if you haven't seen it already. And got a lot of stuff in the pipeline. So make sure you follow my channels. But let's get on and have a closer look at Gemini's May announcements. Now, it's not really a bonus as such, but the fact that Gemini's announcement sets are so much smaller makes these videos a lot more leisurely, and I don't have to go through them in the same way I do with other brands. So I'm just going to go through the models here using the Gemini part numbers, and that means that there's a bit of a spread of types, but there aren't, or there isn't this month, a lot of repetition of types, so grouping them doesn't really matter. And we're going to begin with an Air France 777-300ER. The registration is G Zulu November Hotel. Gemini's text says new livery. Now, it isn't quite a new livery, but what they have done, Air France, is quite dramatically increase the size of the titles. And they've moved around some of the logos, and the hippocampus, or hippocamp, or whatever it's called, the little flying mermaid horse thing, is next to the cockpit. So they've made a small revision to their scheme. And to be honest, Air France have been doing this sort of thing for a long time, playing around with their liveries and making minor changes to them. So it's not actually that unusual, even though they've had effectively the same livery now for 30, 40 years, with one big change. They've had lots of little changes in between, which mean there are lots and lots of Air France livery variations out there. If you're paying attention, they just all look quite similar. Anyway, there are even two versions of this new scheme floating about. One of them has the Air France titles on the left-hand side right up against the L1 door, and the other one, which is the version that Gemini are producing here, has those titles pushed back somewhat so that they end close to the L3 door. So there are even two versions of this, and I'm not sure which of those is supposed to be the ongoing version. I assume they're not going to have two different versions. Now, in terms of this model, the only company that's been paying attention to these Air France livery changes in 400 scale to date has been Phoenix, and they have actually released both versions of this scheme already. They produced FGZ November Delta, where in the scheme that matches this new Air France version from Gemini. So they've already released that, and they released that one a little while ago, which makes me think this is the older version of the scheme. They released that in 2021, so quite a while ago. And just recently they've released the other version. They released FGSQA, the one with the Air France tiles close to the L1 door, and that was released just this year. So even though Gemini is saying this is the new scheme version, I think it's actually not. I think that it is the scheme version before the current version, if you get my meaning. But Phoenix is the only competition in 400 scale for this version of livery anyway. And I personally think the JC Gemini 777 is better than the Phoenix one, even though the Phoenix model turned out nicely. I think that this one will be super nice as well and slightly superior. I'm going to put this one up into high flyer because there hasn't been a lot of love for Air France 777s in this scheme, and at the same time Phoenix is the only other company to have made this scheme version, and that was a few years ago. Now next up is an aircraft which there's been a huge outpouring of interest in 400 scale for, and that's not surprising at all because it's this Air India A350. I can imagine there's a huge market for buying this new livery Air India A350, both within and without of India itself. So it's not surprising that Gemini are announcing it, but they are a little bit late because it has been announced and released by Phoenix already, and they produced the same registration as Gemini are making here, which is VT Juliet Romeo Hotel. So they've made this exact model, and that one has been released. The model has also been announced by Aviation 400 and ngmodels as VTJR Alpha, and NG has now also announced JR Bravo. So there are plenty of these Air India A350s floating around. They're all, as far as I'm aware, are the same except for the reg. The NG ones are almost certainly going to be the best. If you're interested in detachable gear, then I imagine that the Aviation 100 one is something that will be on your radar. The Gemini one is going to be more aligned with the Phoenix one. The mold is slightly better than the Phoenix, but yeah, I personally not really feeling the love for this particular choice. I completely understand why they've made it. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to put the standard version of this into Workhorse. I'm going to put the flaps down version up into High Flyer. That one's offering something different. The next model is back to the States, or the first American release of this set, and it's another Alaska Horizon Embraer 175. Last month they had the Go Dogs, University of Washington colours. This month we've got University of Washington, but instead it's the Go Cougs. I believe the Cougars are the Washington State NFL team, so American football. Again, it's another super bright, quite nice livery. It's got effectively the same template as the Go Dogs one had last month, but this time different colours, different tiles, and different logo on the tail. Their Cougar looks a bit weird. I have to say, the livery, the Cougar logo is odd, but it does look quite cool. Yeah, I liked the Go Dogs one last month. There's no reason to dislike this one as well. I'm sure it'll be popular. I'll put this one up into Supersonic. The mold is not necessarily Supersonic mold, but I think it's a good choice. It'll be popular. It's going to look nice. There's no reason not to. Next up is a release which isn't particularly surprising because jcwings have recently announced a version of it. No, not the standard scheme. JC don't get to do the standard scheme. They just get to do the less interesting, less important schemes, the ones that Gemini doesn't want to buy the licensing for, like I think it was for breast cancer, wasn't it, or something like that. Anyway, this one is Copa Airlines. It's a MAX 9. It's in the standard scheme. HP 9907. Charlie Mike Papa is the reg. As I said, JC announced the one which is Hasloa Tempo colours, which is a cancer-related scheme, a couple of months ago. And this one is effectively the standard version of that. It wouldn't surprise me if they were made at the same time as models. But looking at it, nobody else has been making Copa Maxes, not even NG, which is surprising. I imagine they will in time. This isn't the first Copa Max 9 from Gemini. They made the one with the big Max 9 titles a few years back. But this one is just kind of standard titles. You know, it doesn't have the big Max 9 anymore. It's just ordinary livery. It's not the most exciting scheme, is it? Very continental-like. But popular airline, not been made before. Yeah, I'm going to put this one up in the supersonic as well. I do like their Max 9 mold as well, so it's all around it's going to be a solid and good model. So that's slightly unusual. Out of the first 4 releases I've talked about here, only one of those has actually been from the United States, but there are a couple more US releases, but only 2 more. So it's a very US-like month for Gemini. The first one is a Delta 767-400 N844 Mike Hotel. It's wearing the Sky Team livery, which is a nice scheme, but I've made my feelings reasonably clear about my opinion of the Gemini 767-400 mold. It isn't very good. In fact, it's arguably pretty damn bad. I've done the review of it before. Check that out at the website if you haven't seen the detailed comparison where it fails to beat the Dragon Wings version. It certainly is miles behind the Panda Models release, which have just trickled out onto the market now. NG obviously have a 764 coming too. I would, if I were you, just hold your horses and wait for a better version of this Delta Sky Team livery to come out than this one. I don't think this one is going to be very good because the mold is just not very good. It's a cheap, lazy 767-400 in my opinion, and vastly inferior to the Panda version and to the upcoming NG one too. So not doing much for me this one. I'm going to put it into Workhorse. It is unique. No one else has made it, so it's not, you know, but the mold didn't do it for me. So Workhorsing that one. Now, slipping in between the 2 American releases, the Delta and the one I haven't talked about yet, is a Lufthansa 747-400. This one registered DABVY, wearing the current Lufthansa scheme. Now, it is certainly not the first time that Gemini have made a Lufthansa 747-400 in this livery. They made DABVM, and they made that in 2019, so 5 years ago. But the big difference here between this one and that one is, at least I hope, that this one will be using the new JC 747-400 mold and not the really old seamed Gemini 747-400 mold. That previous release was using the seamed mold. No, it looked okay and had aerials and had been updated. It suffers from the mold being one of the very earliest molds from 400 scale. This new mold is significantly superior. Obviously, it's the really nice, seamless, modern mold. The only issue with it is the fact that the nose gear leg is too short, but hopefully won't have a big impact on the quality of the model. So this one's got a lot of potential. I think it looks like it should be really good, and I don't really see any problems with this. Obviously, Lufthansa is a very common airline for Gemini, and they clearly sell well. But do I perceive this to be a supersonic model or a high flyer? I'll put it in the supersonic. I'm perhaps a bit generous in this video, but there's nothing really to say that this model shouldn't be supersonic. I'm sure it'll be popular. It is going to be the best release of this scheme and aircraft combo in the scale to date, though that admittedly has not been a lot of competition. And yeah, can't see any reason not to give it a decent score, I think. So I'll put this one up in the supersonic. So with that German out of the way, we're back to the United States for the last of the American releases this month. And you just don't get very many regional aircraft in 400 scale. You certainly do not get very many regional classics in 400 scale. And you definitely also don't get very many Saab 340s. In fact, there have only been 16 other Saab 340 releases in the scale over a long time. By Gemini anyway. I think there have been a few by JC slipped out here and there, but not very many. You don't get a lot of Saabs, which is a shame because it's a cool aircraft. However, it is also, because it is a Saab 340, one of the smallest models that can be made in 400 scale with existing molds. I think it probably ties for size with the Shorts 360. It's even slightly smaller than the DC3 in terms of the wingspan and such. And that does mean sometimes that things don't work out the way you want them to, especially because in recent times, Gemini has been struggling with the nose gear size on these. Now, the first releases that came out using this mold had this amazingly tiny little nose gear on them, and that was still being used up until 2016, 2017 sort of time. Then you see from this Silver Airways release how small the nose gear is. And in recent times, the nose gear has been getting larger, and when you look at, for example, the last release, the WestJet, that came out just last year, then you can see the nose gear is significantly larger, but still looks okay. But then if you look at this Logan Air release, which was the one beforehand, then the nose gear on that one was just monstrous. So Gemini have had some issues here getting the right nose gear, and even the standard gear is possibly a little big when you look at the size of the original gear, which was really nicely sized and tiny. But ignoring all that, this is Eastern Express, Bar Harbor Airlines, N407 Bravo Hotel, and that is pretty exciting from where I sit. An Eastern Airlines regional carrier from what would be the late 80s, and obviously before 92, because Eastern had gone bankrupt in 91. So, super cool, really looking forward to this. Just hope that they get the nose gear looking okay. I think this is going to be, for me, the standout model of the month. Saab 340 model overall is great, aside from that little nose gear issue, and it's a really, really cool and interesting scheme that nobody else is ever going to make in the scale. So this is where Gemini have this opportunity to excel, and I think that this is an excellent, excellent release. So clearly supersonic for me, and probably, yeah, this is lining up to be perhaps one of, if not the best releases from Gemini this year, I think. So excellent, excellent choice. Okay, so we've just got 3 models left to discuss in the video. The next one up is European. It's ITA or ITA Airways. It's an A330 Neo EI Hotel Juliet November. It's the same registration of aircraft that has been produced already by Aviation 400 with their detachable landing gear. I've got some reservations about the AB400 mould, but I have to say the model did look stunning, and they do the colour really well, and it looked really nice. And overall package of the model was great, and I think it probably sold pretty well because I'm not seeing lots of these available. So this is effectively going to be exactly the same model on arguably a slightly superior mould, but not necessarily dramatically superior, and possibly slightly inferior to the NG releases. Now, NG haven't announced this model, but it wouldn't surprise me at all if they do make it. Gemini did make the A330 CEO version of this livery not long ago on a Series 200, and that model came out looking pretty ordinary because the mold's not great, but the colours looked okay. So, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think this will be nice. And it hasn't even been made once before by AV400, and the mould is perhaps not as good as this Gemini mould. So I'll put this one in the high flyer. I think there's space for this in the marketplace. Now, moving back to North America, but not in the US itself, we've got a 727-200, and it does feel sometimes that brands are stretching to use like a 77 mold, trying to find some way a modern version of the type, and there aren't many around anymore. But the Mexican National Guard or Mexican Police do have some, and this one is XCMPF. And it's wearing this grey, two-tone grey scheme with a coloured Mexican flag rudder, which is quite handsome. It's not as cool as the previous incarnation when it was with the Mexican Federal Police, where it was all black. And that's been made by Gemini incidentally already, and also by Aero Classics. But it is still pretty cool. It looks quite interesting. It's not really the sort of thing that floats my boat. I don't really you know, go with these non-airline governmental schemes, but I can understand why it would be still reasonably popular. So yeah, there have been question marks in my mind also about the look and feel of some of these recent Gemini 727s. I've been broadly disappointed by them. I was disappointed by the National, obviously, because it had hush kits on when it shouldn't have done, but I was disappointed also by the Trump one. I didn't think that looked particularly good either. And even the Southwest one, for me, they're just not really quite pulling it off. But the mould is still decent, and I'm sure this one, again, will be popular in its target market. So I'd say high flyer for this one. Again, I think it's going to be a good model, but not really my kind of thing. And that just leaves one model to discuss, and for me, this is the weakest model of the month. It's S7 Airlines. Now, I've talked a few times about how I'm not so comfortable with Russian airliners being made that sport Russian post-Ukraine war regs, and this is one of those. So it's an A320neo RA73428. Now, Gemini have actually made an S7 A320neo previously. They just made it, you know, prior to the war with the VQ reg, and to be honest, it didn't look very good because the mould, as I've talked about many times before, is pretty damn weak. Huge engines, and just generally the shape of it, it just doesn't hang together nicely, and I don't think that release looked particularly good. This one may look slightly better. The mould has been tweaked somewhat, but not enough to make it good, I would say. And I don't really like the fact that they're making these modern Russian post-Ukraine war airlines. And I've said the same for NG, this is not a Gemini thing. I am curious as to why Gemini are making them. There must be somebody buying them. Maybe in Russia, I don't know. Because it's just, otherwise it's a curious choice, because this isn't the first one they've made. They've made a few Russians recently. Did they make a Ural? I think they did, and they made the UT Air Series 800. So there's clearly some demand for these very modern Russian releases. Yeah, I don't really understand it. But when it comes to this, that aspect, the fact the mould is weak, I'm going to put this one into Gas Guzzler. So for me, this is the least impressive of the releases this month. But overall, when you look at the 10 or 11 models here, then it's a solid Gemini release set. There's not a lot of surprises here. Even things that maybe would surprise you for other brands do it like that. The 77 here are not really surprising from Gemini. ITA, Lufthansa, Delta, Copa, Alaska, Air India, Air France, these are all common Gemini release airlines. Nothing wrong with that. They're serving the market, they're clearly popular and sell, so that's fine. But I do think that the Eastern Express Saab 340 is far and away the standout release here. But there's a smattering of other solid releases around it. As you can see from the ranking here, I put quite a few in supersonic and quite a few in high flyer. It's a perfectly reasonable set. Doesn't necessarily get me excited apart from that Eastern Express, but it's doing a job and doing the job reasonably well. So, decent set in what has been a decent year, I think, for Gemini. Not, you know, thrilling, but certainly not bad. Okay, cool. So that's this month Gemini. Now, I still am supposed to be doing a jcwings video for all the releases that were announced probably about 2 weeks ago now, and I haven't got around to it, and I apologise for that. I will be doing that video soon, so keep an eye out for that. But that's it for now from yesterday's Airlines. Thanks very much for watching. Hope you enjoy this set from Gemini. Drop some comments about which ones you like, and I'll see you next time. So, bye from yesterday's Airlines.